Dr. Goldner, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You have a fascinating life story and the way you discovered a whole plant-based diet, and I would love to, for our listeners and myself, to hear it again if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So, long before I ever had a white coat, I was in the patient gown. I was sick since I was in my teens. Actually, I'd probably say I started having symptoms between 12 and 14. I started having migraines. And my mom took me to the doctors, we went to neurology, they did all the tests, and couldn't find the cause of it. So they just gave me medicine for the pain and kind of said, okay, you just have migraines. A few years after that is when I started actually getting things like arthritis. So when I was 16, I started getting joint pain, really severe, horrifically painful pain that would actually move around to different joints. I started getting rashes, specifically one across my face, and the migraines got worse, and I started having issues with fatigue, and it was a lot of different things started going wrong. And finally, on one day, I had a really bad day. I'd been out in the sun all day, which can be part of what activates my illness. And I was in the sun all day, and I came home and my rash was bright red. I had a terrible migraine. I was throwing up from the migraine. And I came out of the bathroom after throwing up. My dad took one look at me and went, whoa, okay, something's really wrong here. So we called my doctor and went to the hospital. And that's when she finally put it together, because when I had the joint pain, they gave me medicine for pain. It was always like, well, we don't know.
Yeah.
But at this point, it really came together to say, okay, this actually looks like something called lupus. And they ran all the tests at the hospital and confirmed it. And not only did I have lupus, that explained the rash and the pain, but I also was in stage 4 kidney failure already at that point. So it went from, having rashes and pain and headaches to ending up having to get a kidney biopsy, and then ending up in the nephrologist's office the next day, and him actually sitting down my mother and my grandmother who was with us and saying, your kidneys are failing so quickly, you're not going to make it past 6 months from now unless we do something really severe to try to save your life. This is beyond the normal treatments for lupus, which, I'm almost 45 now. So back then, it was mostly steroids and a bunch of other different pills they gave me, not all the newer, fancier ones I'd come out with in the past 20 years. But he said, that's not going to do it. You're going to end up on dialysis if you're lucky. And if you're not lucky, you won't make it past 6 months. So at that point, I started doing experimental treatments. And so they did an experimental treatment using chemotherapy, which they still use to this day. And the point of it was, since lupus is autoimmune, it's a disease where your own immune system, instead of attacking things like viruses, is attacking your own organs. And it can attack any organ. People with lupus, I've helped people reverse lupus in their brain, in their hearts, in their lungs, and in their kidneys. And so I had it in my kidneys, and they said, okay, well, what if we use the side effect of chemotherapy, which is that it destroys the immune system, it suppresses it. That's why people with cancer often die of infections. What if we do that on purpose? Kind of like when your computer doesn't work and we shut it off and then we let it restart and hope that whatever the bug was goes away. That was the theory, was if we use the chemotherapy to suppress the immune system with steroids as well, maybe when we let it come back on again, it won't be attacking your kidney anymore. It did not work initially. They had to keep going and keep going and keep going. And then every time they stopped, my kidneys would get worse. And so I actually was on chemotherapy for 2 years straight. So from 16 to 18, I finished high school while also taking chemotherapy, 7 different kinds of medications by mouth. And the good news is it worked. I mean, I'm here because of that, because that was the best that we knew how to do. And my doctors are excellent. They were absolutely excellent. They found it. They were aggressive about how they treated it, and they saved my life. And it's one of the reasons I became a doctor, was they saved my life, and I wanted to be able to help other people in the same way. But it didn't give me health. And that's why in Western medicine, autoimmune diseases are not considered curable, because you can't use a medicine to make it go away, right? If you have a bacterial infection, you take an antibiotic, you've cured the infection. Right? We don't have that for autoimmune disease with medications. So it's just accepted that you will continue to be sick over time, and we will use medicines to try to slow it down. And if you have a flare where you get worse, we'll use more medicines to try to suppress it again. So that was life for me. Was, when I had joint pain, I took medicine. When I had migraines, I took medicine. When I had kidney failure, I took more medicine. Kidneys got into a remission where they were still affected, but they weren't getting worse anymore. And that was what remission is in lupus, is that you are, not getting worse. You're stable. You're not dying in the moment. But still, all of my blood tests showed that I had an illness, and I still had protein in my urine, which is a sign of kidney problems. But that was considered a good response. And, then in medical school, I started getting blood clots. I got double vision, and they found that I was sending blood clots into my brain. Thankfully, I didn't have a major stroke. I have what they call transient ischemic attacks, or mini strokes, meaning that you get affected, but then you recover fully, thankfully. But this was caused by the lupus again, but it was a new thing. Instead of the kidneys, now I was getting blood clots. And so that is really the path of autoimmune disease, and really disease in general in our modern world, which I believe is something that we've created through our lifestyles. I can go deeper into that at some point if you want, but that is the path of these kind of illnesses, is you just try to stay ahead of it, keep up with it, but it's always going to get worse. It's going to progress. So by the time I was in my mid-20s and I'd had the blood clots and the kidney failure, it was very clear that I had an aggressive disease, that I wasn't going to live a long life, that I was going to become disabled at some point from all the chronic pain and potentially from different organ problems or strokes. And I also, my doctor's very clear with me, between the different organ failure and the blood clots, you can't have children, it'll kill you to try. And, it was kind of one of those things where I knew on some level that I had this disease that I had to contend with, and then I might not have as much time on this earth as other people necessarily expect to have. But I never let it really hold me back in my life, because I really turned that around as motivation to have the most meaningful life I possibly could. That I'm not going to wait until I'm older to try to do everything I want to do. I'm going to laugh, I'm going to love, I'm going to have experiences, I'm going to achieve everything I can academically, I'm going to affect as many lives as I can in a positive way. And so I was just a nonstop go-getter. I mean, there were days where I couldn't do anything because I hurt too much, but on the days I was up, I was up. And most people never even knew that I had an illness, because I just didn't spend much time talking about it. I only thought about my illness as long as it took to take my meds in the morning, and then I put it aside. I could have arthritis and pain and headaches and sit home and have nothing, or I can have all that pain and headaches and arthritis and I could go do something constructive. And so I just kind of put it in a box, and I used it to just fuel my passion about life and making my life mean as much as possible for myself and for other people. And that's what I really thought was going to be my path. I thought I would be a great doctor because I understood what it was like to live with chronic illness. I understood what it was like to find meaning and make a good life in spite of it. A lot of people get very depressed and give up on their lives. And I wanted to be an example for my patients, to show them that you can live fully. And that was really what I hoped to get from it, and it was it wasn't planned that I ever was going to find a way not to have lupus or not to be sick. I did try originally, like when I went to Carnegie Mellon for undergrad, I started doing genetic research, and I started doing it, they said you can't do genetic research till you're a junior. Well, summer after freshman year, I kept showing up at the labs every day until somebody let me do research, because you can't stop me. So I just kept knocking. I don't know how much time I have. I want to do genetic research now. And so I was thinking maybe I will find a cure. And I did genetic research in leukemia and neurobiology, and I graduated with honors for the research I did. And, I finally realized, research is slow. And even when you do something great, it's really just like a micro movement to the next thing. And I knew that I really wanted to impact people on a daily basis. So I went to medical school, but nothing I ever learned either through genetics or research or medical training taught me that there was a path to recovery from autoimmune or really any chronic illness through food, nor did it teach me that there was a path to illness through food. It was just never addressed or talked about. So the recovery I have and becoming plant-based and developing the very specific protocol that I have, all of that was accidental. I was interviewed for a podcast where someone said, you must have always known that there was a better way, and that's why you never stopped looking. I said, no, I believed everything I was taught in school. I never thought to look for something more. I was never a conspiracy person that said, oh, maybe they're holding back the cure. No, I'm actually a very trusting soul. I just, I did not believe any of that. I absorbed everything I was ever taught. I was always the best student at everything. You know, I was chief resident. Like I always just absorbed everything I was taught. I never thought there was something that was missing. And I never anticipated that. I never was looking for that. It was really accidental. It was because I met my husband, Thomas. He wanted to marry a sick woman. I had to explain to him just how difficult life would be with me, that, you know, I can't have your children. You're going to have to take care of me when I'm disabled. You know, I'm not going to live as long as you are. And he, you know, he told me he'd rather have a short life with me than a lifetime with anyone else. And he wanted to get married. Sweet. He's amazing. I still cry when I talk about it. That's why I'm like already mopping it up. But that's why I changed my diet, was not because I thought it was going to affect my health, but because I wanted to look good in my wedding dress. And the white coat can really cover up a lot of stuff. You know, if you're on the hospital food diet, it's the best diet to be overweight and sick. So it is really good for hospital business if you eat hospital food. All right. It keeps their beds full.
And it's pretty awful too, to be honest.
That's what I mean. It's terrible. It's horrible. So I was eating hospital food every day. And I did my medical training in Pittsburgh, where they literally would, if you ordered a salad, they would put ranch dressing and french fries on top. So, I mean, I was not, even though I was at that point vegetarian, I became vegetarian as a teenager, just because I loved animals, and we had a vegetarian neighbor and all that stuff. But I was eating dairy, processed foods, eggs all day, every day. Was not a healthy diet. So my husband's expertise is in metabolism, and he's a best-selling author too, in a book called Miracle Metabolism, where he was obsessed with the idea that there must be an optimal diet for human metabolism, that if we are all made of cells, then we should all have one best way to eat to create a fast metabolism so that fat loss happens or muscle building happens. And when he was getting his master's in exercise science, they were saying, well, some people do better on high carb, low carb, high fat. And he goes, this is not science. It's not science. There's gotta be one best way. And he was obsessed with that. So when I met him, and that's what his obsession and what he had been learning, looking at cellular biology, was that there's certain things cells need to operate optimally. And he was looking purely at fitness. And vitamins and minerals, you know, which come largely from vegetables. You absorb more and do better with raw vegetables. So he was doing that, omega-3 fatty acids, water, all this stuff. So I said, I want to look like the people you're training. That he was training celebrities. I'm like, I want to look like a celebrity at my wedding, right? So, but he was still using meat. He was doing what is similar to what became paleo now. I mean, we're talking 16 years ago. People weren't using those terms, but he's saying free range meat, less inflammatory, da da da. And I said, I don't eat meat. And he said, I've never trained a vegetarian. I don't know what to do. So we took his diet, took the meat out, and I ended up accidentally being 100% vegan, mostly raw, just because of that. So there was no planning that I was going, there was no, you know, I remember the only time I even heard the word vegan was in college, and I thought it sounded too extreme. So there was no plan for it. It just kind of evolved. And what happened was, one, the diet worked. I went from a size 11 to a size 3 in 3 months. I was ripped. I looked beautiful at my wedding. I was very proud of myself. But more exciting actually was the fact that I was in my first year of my residency. So I'm an intern. I'm working 30-hour shifts, because they don't care if you have lupus. You got to work your shift, you know? And so I was working these really long shifts, and I had tons of energy. I had no arthritis. I had no headaches. I was so energetic that my chairman of my program was worried about me, because all the other interns
do you do cocaine?
All the other interns were appropriately depressed and exhausted, and I was bubbly and excited. And now that is my general personality, but he thought maybe I was manic or something. I said, no. He said, why are you so happy all the time? He said, because I'm living my dream job. I worked my whole life to become a doctor, and I'm here. And he's like, oh, wow. Okay. Wow. But I felt so good. And so when I went to get my labs drawn, normally I'd gotten them drawn every 4 weeks, because I'd been sick since I was 16. I was now 28. They watched me closely because I was, you know, it's the kidneys and the blood clots. Mm-hmm. So they watched me. And when I moved to California, I had to start over with new doctors. And then the new doctor I picked retired, and I had to wait for a new doctor. So there was this gap between when I changed my diet for about 3.5 months. I hadn't had any lab tests, which was unusual for me, but I was also feeling good, so I wasn't too worried about it. But when I went to get my lab test drawn, it had been 3.5 months after I changed my diet. For the first time in 12 years, all of the lab tests for lupus were negative, which is weird because you don't have lupus for 12 years, almost die multiple times, and just not have lupus antibodies. ANA, dsDNA, for anyone who cares about what they are. There was no protein in my urine. There was the blood clot antibodies were on the border. All the other ones were gone. They retested me because they thought it was a lab mistake, because there's no way that the chart that they received was my chart and those were my labs. And when they retested again, even the blood clot antibodies were completely negative. My cholesterol, which I had been told was high because of genetics, not because of all the cheese I ate, my cholesterol was 150. And they went, huh, that's weird. And that was it. And so we actually, even then, didn't realize I was better. I am a doctor. I believed everything I was taught. So I thought it was just a really good remission, even though it's supposed to be impossible that my blood test would be negative. We didn't really think about it too much further because it was weird. And who could think of why it happened? I mean, the only thing I'd done was change my diet. And obviously diet had nothing to do with lupus, or I would have been taught that. So it was just kind of a shrug situation. And it wasn't until 4 years later when I finally decided I wanted to have a baby, which was against medical advice, but I'd had normal blood tests for 4 years, no sign of lupus. I was in the best shape of my life. I was following my husband's programs. I had a 6-pack. I mean, I was so fit. And I said, I know I can do this. I haven't been sick for so many years, and I just felt like I could do it. And it was only after I had a healthy pregnancy. They tried to send me to high risk, and the high risk doctors refused to follow me. I had a healthy pregnancy, childbirth, never relapsed. And my pregnancy weight was gone in 9 days. That's when my husband and I went, something's not right here. This is not usual, And so that's when we started to look back at cellular biology and nutrition science, but looked at specifically, what did I start eating? Because that was the only thing I did was change my diet. So we realized it must be the diet. What did I start eating that could possibly affect cellular repair and immunity? And what did I stop eating that could possibly be causing damage? And we realized we'd accidentally created the most anti-inflammatory nutrition protocol you could have. But then still we didn't want to share it because it's not scientific to say, just do what I did. I think that's why I got better. We wanted to prove it. So we tested it over and over again for another year. And only when we had a protocol that worked every time, that everyone who tried it had significant reversal of their symptoms and their illness, only then did I bring it to the public. So since then, I've helped thousands of people all over the world get their health back from lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, mixed connective tissue disease, Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, in addition to things like diabetes, heart disease, and using this very specific protocol that is plant-based. And it's been the most extraordinary thing ever. I mean, I was just hoping to be able to inspire people while living whatever life I got. But it's been really extraordinary to have had all the experience I had up until now and have it actually be saving lives on such a huge, huge worldwide level.
So how is your diet different from typical vegan or plant-based? Or is it the same?
So there's a difference between vegan and plant-based, right? So a vegan diet, that's a name that's been given to not just a diet, but a lifestyle. So a vegan lifestyle means that you are trying to live your life causing no harm, if possible, to any animals. So that means that they do not eat anything that comes from an animal, whether it is meat or dairy or eggs or honey, but they also don't wear leather. They won't use anything that has animal products in it. So it is really a lifestyle about living a cruelty-free way of doing as little harm as possible, right? So that is one thing. Plant-based eating is purely about diet. Right. So people are vegan for many reasons. They're vegan because they care about the planet, because it reduces the impact of pollution and deforestation, et cetera. They're vegan because they care about animals. But vegan does not mean healthy. Right now, it used to, but nowadays, vegan is pretty popular. And I mean, celebrities are vegan, lots of people are vegan. So now you can eat vegan junk food all day long, that not just French fries, but, the vegan burgers and chips and, so it's not necessarily, doesn't really concern health much. It just concerns impact on others, that planet, the animals. Plant-based eating is specifically about eating foods that do not contain animal products and oils as well. So T. Colin Campbell actually coined the phrase plant-based when he was doing his research on the impact of nutrition and cancer. And what he found was back when he was doing this research, was in the 80s, he was trying to talk about it. And he found that there was too much emotional connection to using words like vegetarian. He didn't even know about vegan back then, but saying vegetarian, other things that people don't consider that scientific. So he came up with this phrase that sounded more clearly scientific, that if your diet comes mainly from plants, so plant-based diet. And then he added to it later, whole foods plant-based diet, which doesn't mean you shop at Whole Foods, it gets confusing, but meaning that it's not processed, no parts of foods where you're getting, corn oil, right? Like you're not taking something from a plant, but you're using the plant in its whole form. So whole food plant-based is a type of eating designed to promote health specifically. So it eschews any animal products, so no meat, no dairy, but also oils or other processed foods, sugars, things that don't expire, right? So it's a type of eating that has been shown to benefit human health. And so while all plant-based diets would, well, if you're doing it purely plant-based, you would be a vegan as well in terms of your diet, right? But not all vegans eat a plant-based diet. So those are different. And you can be both. And a lot of people do become both, right? Like I actually do all of the above. I don't eat any animal products. I don't wear animal products. I live, I tried to take care of myself and the planet and all that good stuff as best I can. It kind of becomes addictive to just do more and be better. It just happens.
Yeah,
but
the
plant-based is about health. And so my protocol is very specifically designed to optimize cellular repair and the anti-inflammatory immune system. So not all plant-based diets are going to do that, okay? So when you're eating a plant-based diet, it's really about what you don't eat. I don't eat animal products. I don't eat oils. I don't eat processed foods. What do you eat? There's the variety. Some people are eating beans and rice every day. Other people are eating salads. Other people are eating, cooked vegetables, or there's so much variety. And there's different people who might say that they think one way is better than another, et cetera. So there's different camps of thinking within the plant-based community. But I have a protocol, and that's what really is different about me, is I have a protocol designed specifically for cellular repair and anti-inflammatory. So when people are doing what I call it hyper-nourishment, so the Goodbye Lupus protocol is about hyper-nourishment, where we intentionally overdose people in the foods that have the highest density of nutrition that will stimulate cellular repair and the anti-inflammatory immune system. And that's what causes this rapid regression of symptoms like arthritis and inflammatory disease, thyroid disease, kidney failure. Like I have someone in my rapid recovery group right now with lupus nephritis on dialysis, who by the middle of the group was able to urinate again on her own. She hadn't been able to do that for longer than she can remember, that her kidney started to come back online again because it's repairing itself so quickly. So that is a specific protocol that is 100% plant-based, but it's very, very specific.
But what's this? Is it the what type of plants are there? Like what's most anti-inflammatory?
What's most anti-inflammatory? Okay.
Yeah.
So and it's a really important question, because anti-inflammatory is a big buzzword, but not everyone who says they're eating anti-inflammatory actually is, right? Plant-based diets are not inflammatory, but they're not necessarily anti-inflammatory. To me, anti-inflammatory means that it's actually eliminating inflammation. It's repairing it, it's removing it. So if you want to repair damage from your immune system from the inflammatory immune system and get the anti-inflammatory immune system working properly and fix your cells, you need this list of things. All right. So this is what we do in hyper-nourishment. Number one, you need really high doses of vitamins and minerals. And the best place to get that is actually from raw vegetables, specifically cruciferous vegetables. So if you're looking at, it's kind of like this. If you had a really, really bad headache, you wouldn't just lick a Tylenol, right? You'd take 2 or 3, depending on the headache, right? So when you're looking at dosing up your food in order to get the maximum benefit, raw cruciferous vegetables, hands down, have the highest nutrient density of any other plant. So if I'm trying to get people better as quickly as possible, we're going to get the highest dose of their nutrition from raw cruciferous vegetables and dark leafy greens. So it ends up being like spinach, kale, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, things like that. Then you have to also look at omega-3 intake. So omega-3 fatty acids are something you must consume in order to have them. And They're the key ingredient of your anti-inflammatory immune system. You can't build your anti-inflammatory immune system without it, which is why many people can create inflammation and get sick, but they can't get unsick again, right? They're deficient. Omega-3s are also a necessary component of all of your cellular membranes to make sure that they can give and receive signals quickly. It's why it increases your metabolic rate. And it also is important for brain function, many different things. So people are starved for omega-3s. So I use flax and chia seeds or cold pressed flax oil to get those omega-3s up higher. We need to get them higher as quickly as possible. And then water intake. Many people don't even talk about water. They're focused on what's the best tea. I haven't seen any one tea reverse disease, but if people are dehydrated, they absolutely will stunt, slow down, or abort their cellular recovery because water is so essential for recovery. So I really focus on that aspect. And you can add hypernourishment to any diet. Even people who are eating McDonald's, they can hypernourish as well. And the easiest way I get people to do that is with these green smoothie recipes that I share with them, where it's just, if you don't want to eat tons of kale and you don't know what to do with flax or chia seeds and you hate water, well, great, put it all in the blender, add fruit for flavor, blend it up, put a straw in it, and you can drink your way to better health. And the better your diet is outside of hypernourishment, the more impact it'll have, right? So if you're not causing any damage by eating a plant-based diet and you're hypernourishing, you're going to have a much greater effect than, if you had a smoothie and you had a hamburger. But still adding that antidote, I find, makes a big difference in how people feel and usually motivates them to take more steps towards healthier eating because they can feel the difference between their inflammatory meals and the hypernourishment.
One thing I find very interesting is meat and animal products have been with humans through the history of humankind, right? Probably it wasn't in the same amount of consumption that we have now because we have refrigerators and in the past we had to hunt for 3 days in order to get some food, some meat. And why is meat bad for people? Why is animal products are bad for humans, like from the scientific perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, while meat has not been predominant in most of our historical ancestors, but it did show up here and there. And even when they look back at what they do is they look at fossils of feces, poop fossils, to look at what our ancestors ate. And they found paleo fossils and they ate almost entirely plants. It was little bits of animal products, not big steak meals, right? Like we have now. So when they did eat meat, it was very sparingly. And I think a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, I mean, one, as long as there was bountiful produce, there was no reason to do that. If you could just walk around and eat leaves and eat vegetables and eat fruits, you're fine. But when there are certain climates where it was winter, they might have started to eat meat for those reasons. Although the theory is probably it was mostly scavenging because we're not built for hunting. We don't have claws. We're not fast. Right? We're not going to catch a deer on our own 2 legs, right? So more likely they were scavenging what other animals might have left behind or eating bugs like a lot of our ape-like ancestors, or, mostly plants, maybe a little bit of bugs or something, but it wasn't a huge part of the diet. And the fossil records show that the majority of what people were eating were plants. That's what they were living on. So it was a small amount. Once we created farming where we could trap animals and have them at the ready, it went up more. And then refrigeration, of course, as well, it went up more. So it's not our natural diet, but it is one that if we prepare it in a certain way, if we cook it, add spices to it, it tastes good at that point, and it stimulates these neurotransmitters in our brain, just like drugs do. So just like, when we found plants that if we chewed on the plant leaf, we could stay very awake and alert while we were foraging or doing our nightly, dance around the fire. Then we found, if you really take a lot of these plants and turn it into a powder and snort it up your nose, then you really can have a party, right? It's human nature that we find something that stimulates us a little and we find a way to really overdose on it until it could be deadly, right? That's kind of our nature. I mean, they found Egyptian hieroglyphics that were beer recipes. From age, we've been looking at getting high since we discovered that we could. It's just part of that's the destructive part of human nature. So just because we've done things doesn't mean that it's the right thing. But definitely we weren't designed physiologically for it, but we can tolerate certain levels. But when you are consuming high amounts of animal products, so for example, if you look at just meat intake, dairy intake, when you look at the studies around this, what they found is the more animal products people eat, the higher their rates of diseases in all areas, heart disease, cancer, all sorts of different diseases. In any area you look at, the disease rates go up higher and higher. Now we have a new study that was just done where they were looking at rates of moderate to severe COVID compared to diet, where they found that they were studying about 3,000 doctors and nurses on the front lines. And they looked at how many of them got moderate to severe COVID. This was in the first wave, right, before Delta or anything else. Mm-hmm. And how many of them got COVID? And they looked at their diets. It was published in the British Medical Journal, and it was, this prestigious journal. They controlled for everything else, their medical issues, smoking, exercise, PPE. They controlled for everything else so they could really look at diet and COVID. What they found is doctors and nurses that called themselves vegan or plant-based, 73% lower rates of moderate to severe COVID compared to everyone else. Ones that identified as pescatarian, which means I don't eat dairy, but I eat fish and plants, they had a 59% lower rate of moderate to severe COVID. So all those people who think fish helps your immune system, it's the opposite. By adding fish, they went from 73% lower risk of COVID to a 59% lower risk of COVID. Still better than everybody else, not quite as good. Then they looked at the people who identify as high protein, low carb people, right? So all of those people who are doing more paleo or keto approaches, because since they don't teach diets in medical school, doctors and nurses are just as likely to do a fad diet as anybody else. So they're on those diets. And what they found is the people who identified as high protein, low carb diets, they had a 48% greater chance of moderate to severe COVID than everybody else. So instead of a 73% lower chance, like the plant eaters, they had a 48% higher chance of moderate to severe COVID compared to everyone else. So what they decided in the study is it looks like nutrients matter. Since meat and dairy don't really have nutrients in them, those people didn't have as much immunity as people who ate primarily plants or all plants. And what they found is the more meat you add, whether it's fish or chicken or lamb or beef or whatever it is, the more meat you add, the lower your ability to have an appropriate immune response. So when you look just at the results and not even the science behind how it works, you look just at results, that study shows what I've been teaching for over a decade, which is that any kind of animal products interferes with the proper functioning of your immune system. It raises your risk of autoimmune disease, but it also raises your risk of infections and decreases your ability to fight infections. So it's a really important concept. And I teach all this for free. Right now I have free classes online. It's 5 hours of content about how food can create healing versus illness. But one thing I've always been very clear on is that there's many different theories that people can have, right? Everyone with a mouth has their own theory, but results are what matters most. Anybody can sound good saying something, but what are the results? And the results show over and over again that the more plants you eat, the healthier you will be, the more resistant to infections, the more ability you have to heal and repair your body. And the more animal products you eat, the higher your risk of disease, death, infection, all of those things. So it's a really important fact, and it's become more and more accepted and widely known, but still not widely known enough to save all the lives that still need to be saved.
What's interesting, like in this day and age, there is so much information that you can pretty much have a confirmation to any theory you have. And there are studies that would prove it, like there are carnivore diet, right, that says, and I'm pretty sure you can find the scientific proof that it's actually the best thing for people. How do people navigate through that, and why do you think plant-based is actually what's right for people? Like, what's the really scientific evidence of that?
So I mean, you can't just, anyone can create a study to try to prove a certain thing, right? I was working with someone, I have a lot of clients that are either doctors or nurses or in pharmaceutical world, and all of them prefer to use natural methods once they get sick, right? Yeah. But I was working with someone who's a pharmaceutical researcher who told me that they are told to only publish the studies that look good, right? So a lot of meat and dairy industries fund studies, egg industries, they fund studies trying to find something that will make them look good. And unfortunately, it takes a lot, and it has to be skewed in just the right way. You have to subtract different variables and you can do it. So one thing you want to look at when you're looking at a study is who funded it. Very important, because money does influence outcome. It's just a fact of human nature, right? We like to get high, like money, right? So that does affect the outcome and interpretation. So you can't look at just one study. You got to look at a much wider scale, right? So for example, I was on Fox News not that long ago where they wanted me to debate a keto doctor. And, you know, he went to Harvard. He's a doctor. He's a good doctor, right? He should be a good doctor. You would expect that. He's got a good name and everything. And he's teaching keto, which means as much animal products as you want, high fat, dairy, bacon, and you do that for weight loss. All right. So this was before the COVID study came out, or I would have loved to share that one. But he was saying that if you eat no fruit, very limited any plant foods, and just eat as much bacon and cheese and eggs as you want, you can lose tons of weight. And he's absolutely right. There's lots of ways to lose weight, right? You can look very fit doing that. Problem is, as I said to him in that news interview, was there's a lot of ways that you can lose weight while increasing your risk of cancer and heart disease. Smoking is another great choice. You can smoke cigarettes instead of eating. You can get heart attacks and cancer and be skinny, right? So there's a lot of people equate weight loss with improving health, and it's not always the case, right? When I was on chemotherapy, I was also very slim, but I felt very sick. I was not in good shape, right? Now I'm also slim, but I'm very healthy. So we've got to look at all the different factors. So for example, this is not just, certain people in the fringe community that are saying meat's bad for you. The World Health Organization had a consensus of scientists look at all the research that looked at specifically meat and cancer, for example. All the research been done all over the world, and they classified processed meats specifically as a top level carcinogen in the same category as cigarettes and asbestos. Then the next level, category B, was the rest of the meat, which was likely carcinogen, which they were just trying to be careful, but saying that, the studies indicate that all meat is actually carcinogenic. The highest level of proof is the processed meat, hot dogs, bacon, all those deli slices, like bologna. And who eats that stuff? Kids. People are just feeding that stuff to kids, right? Just creating that predisposition for cancer. So the point is, this is not just one study here or there where someone goes, oh, look, someone did carnivore diet for this many weeks and their blood sugar went down. This is looking at the worldwide consensus of the scientific communities that are saying that meat is a carcinogen, dairy is a carcinogen, right? I mean, T. Colin Campbell did research that showed you can turn cancer genes on and off just by dairy protein. Right. So this is it's a scientific consensus, and the fringe doctors really are the ones that are trying to say somehow that eating less fruits and vegetables and more bacon is somehow going to be better for your health than just doing what all of us actually really know. I mean, my grandmother had a 4th grade education and she still knew that you should eat salad every day. It's good for your health. Right. So it's really pushing against it, and it's something people like to embrace because of the addiction quality of it, right? Eating bacon all day is like snorting cocaine. It feels amazing while it destroys your health. And we have to really start seeing it this way. But I think until the FDA is willing to come out and take a stand the way the World Health Organization has, there'll always be this doubt. Just like we knew since the 1950s that cigarettes were causing emphysema and raising problems in people's health, but it wasn't until almost 30 years later, when the FDA finally came out with it, that doctors went, oh, okay, I guess you shouldn't smoke. Why? Because the doctors were smoking too, and they didn't want to think about it either. So, it's really not like this equal battle like it appears to be online, where it's like, oh, for autoimmune, you could do paleo or vegan, and both of those are fine. They're not equal. It's just one has a lot more funding than the other. There's no big broccoli or big kale that pays me to do appearances. I'm doing this for free. Why? Because I care. And I want to get people this information so that they can actually do what they need to do for their health. And by the way, that's also why I teach my protocol for free, even though I've had copycats who have gone online and said they did it and all that stuff and whatever. Like, why am I willing to do that? Because the information should be a human right. And everybody, if you can get it for free, that it's real, right? This is the real deal. And, I've been releasing it for free for many years, and people from all over the world have posted online about how they just followed my free information and their disease is gone. So it is really spreading and people are embracing it, but it's slow for the folks that really need it the most, who are not getting this information. Maybe they're not searching, they're not listening to podcasts, and they're just listening to what their doctor said. And if their doctor doesn't know better, they're not going to give it a chance.
Why isn't this taught at medical schools?
It's a great question. I think change in the medical world is slow. There have been some people who've pointed to the idea that pharmaceutical companies do make donations to medical schools. I don't know if that's the case. It's possible. But what I do know is it's slow. It is changing though. So I have taught medical students. Wayne University, there's a medical student group where they're very interested in nutrition and disease, and they invite speakers who are known in the world of disease reversal to teach them. And so I've gone up and taught them, and it was fantastic. I mean, but out of a group of a few hundred students, I think it was like 50 of them, but that was 50 future doctors. And what they told me is they actually created an entire chapter that went over every study done in nutrition and disease and presented it to their university, to the medical school university, and said, we'd like this taught in our classes. And they said, no, because it's not on the boards. But how's it going to be on the boards if it's not taught? So they are working to fight it and to get the information themselves. This generation is very tuned into going out online. Like, we didn't have the internet when I was a student. I mean, there was no phone like this when I was a student, right? I was one of those medical students that had, 10 books in my pockets, because if there was a question, you got to look it up and find the page, right? We had to memorize 600 drugs a semester. So my generation, we really only got the information that was taught to us directly from our professors. Nowadays, they can expand the search. And they can find people like me. A lot of them will go to my classes online to learn the science behind nutrition and inflammation. And it's life-changing for them. So I've done, there was a medical student who has a podcast in I think Australia. And it was 2 medical students, and they interviewed me. So it's changing. Like I said, it's just not fast enough for the people who are sick right now. But I think it will be at some point that meat and dairy will be looked at the same way that cigarettes are now. That if you see someone smoking, you kind of look at them like, really? It'll be like that. You see someone eating cheeseburger and you go, oh my God, really? So it is happening and changing, because you can't stop the truth.
When do you think it would happen? Like, how many years you give this?
I wish I knew. I mean, I have testified to the USDA Dietary Guidelines Committee multiple times. I'm happy to do that work. I actually had a viral video of me testifying where the first day it had 100,000 views. I was shocked, but people were just so excited to see a doctor fighting against the man, to try to say, like, I was telling them that, every other person testifying here works for the industries. The alcohol industry was testifying to how many drinks a day we should have. The sugar industry lady had little candy cane earrings testifying about how much sugar we should eat every day. And then the meat industry came. Processed meat, oh, bacon's not that bad. What's a little cancer, right? I mean, so all day long, they're listening to testimony from industries making money. And here I am, a doctor trying to save lives, begging you to start doing something better, because the USDA guidelines are what creates the school guidelines, what we feed the kids. Kids are sicker than they've ever been. So I'm fighting really hard, but no change happens. I get one of the first drafts. If you testify, they show you the draft of what's going to be released. They're not even willing to tell kids to eat less sugar. Said there's not enough evidence. Please. Right. So it's very much what comes through the government, unfortunately, is still being dictated by industry. That said, before people get hopeless, it's changing. So the fact that I could testify is a new development, because PCRM, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, it's an organization of doctors that are trying to fight back to help people understand the connection between nutrition and health. And they sued the USDA to allow public testimony, because before it was only industry that was testifying. There was no public testimony. So because they sued, we were allowed to apply to testify, and I get 2 whole minutes, which, as you can tell, I can say a lot in 2 minutes. We get 2 whole minutes, right? And then they sued them again because it was closed door, meaning if you weren't there, you'd never know what was said. And now it's open to the public. So it still hasn't changed their decision-making yet, But the fact that anyone from the public can watch it and people can apply to testify, it's opening things up. We are fighting back. Doctors are fighting back. Doctors in the know. So I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm very optimistic about the fact that we will get there.
So is there a problem that the studies that USDA use primarily financed by interested parties, or they completely ignore studies in general? They just
when you're testifying, you get to bring any research you want with you.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, they're getting exposed to what the people are bringing with them, and what they're, that they are biased studies for sure. I mean, this is one of the problems, I mentioned T. Colin Campbell. He's a revolutionary guy. He created the term whole food plant-based, right? Now, I didn't even know about him when I created my protocol. I didn't even know there were other doctors who had discovered anything about plants. I was a pioneer trying to study nutrition and cellular function. But he was working on government programs to try to help understand the link between nutrition and food and cancer, for example. And when he found his breakthrough research that dairy causes cancer, nobody would publish it. And he ended up being ostracized by the scientific community because all of them were being paid by dairy industry and other animal farm industries. He was showing how, he was supposed to be making guidelines for the USDA. He was the only one who wasn't getting paid by those industries. And suddenly he was off the panel. So he had to self-publish his book to get the information to the public, because he was being shunned. He was being turned away. So thank goodness he did do that. And that's influenced a lot of doctors who've read his studies and had their eyes open to this. So it's very hard. It's very hard in our society. And it doesn't change my optimism. I'm born this way. I believe in change and I fight for it. I'm very vocal about it. I'm a product of what's possible. I'm about to turn 45. I should not be lupus free. Right. And this year will be 16 years I'm lupus free. I've had 2 kids. I have never had a relapse. I've never had a relapse of my labs, of any aches and pains. I am completely healthy for 16 years after 12 years of constantly almost dying from lupus. So I am a product of what's possible. And that's what fuels me every day. Green smoothies fuel me, and hope. And hope and passion fuel me, that I know that if enough of us speak up and continue to spread what we know, the truth cannot be stopped.
So in lupus in general, is it considered to be incurable disease? Is it chronic?
Yes. So lupus is considered chronic and progressive and incurable. And it is considered incurable because we don't have a drug that cures it. And that's how our society works, right? So I have published reversing end-stage kidney failure completely with nutrition off the transplant list.
But is
right?
it study, like peer-reviewed study, or what's
this? Case studies.
What's the reason for that not being widely adopted then? Like, if there is even if it's case study, if it's not peer-reviewed yet, like, why not have a full-blown study to show it and prove it?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be really nice. And I've explored it. But it's very difficult in this current climate we have right now. So, for example, I've had, I won't name places.
Let's name places.
I've had multiple very famous research schools approach me about publishing clinical trial. I was very excited about it. Problem is, there's a lot of problems. All right. One is that the same organization that's willing to do this trial to look at nutrition is also receiving millions, if not billions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies to test their drugs as well. So when you look at unconscious motivation, if the nutrition works and we don't need to study this anymore, then all the money goes away as well, right? So there's a little bit of a conflict there. I didn't like that conflict. The other part of it was that every single one of these very famous, reputable places, they wouldn't let me participate in the study to make sure it was done correctly. They wanted me to take 16 years of research and work and experience, write it down and give it to a dietitian. They would study it on their own and then see what the results were. And it felt very much like a trap that if somebody takes that work, does it the wrong way, and the results say it doesn't work, then they have a reason to publish something that says diet doesn't help, keep taking your medicine, and industry wins. And so I was very open and willing to do these studies. I said, listen, I will run the nutrition, you will be blind. You won't know who I helped and who I didn't. And just look at the results. That is good research. It's blinded to the physicians who are following the patients. They won't know who did the medicines alone versus using the nutrition. They wouldn't do it. They would not let me oversee to make sure it was done correctly. It was very strange to me why they wouldn't want it to be done exactly right. And we've seen it done before where NYU had just had a study where they did looking at vegan versus American Heart Association diet for heart disease. And while the study did work out that the plant-based diet, all the people on the plant-based diet got better, while the people on the American Heart Association diet actually got worse, they didn't get as better as those of us that actually practice plant-based lifestyle medicine see our patients get. The difference wasn't as great. And then when I looked into it, they started making their own changes. Oh yeah, you can have vegan meat. Oh yeah, a little bit of processed is fine. And so it was no longer a pure comparison of what a pure plant-based diet could do, a whole food plant-based diet to do, but it became like vegan with some junk food compared to, so it lessened the difference. It could have been better, basically. So I had some fear that had just come out, and I had some fear that something like that would happen where they wouldn't know what they were doing and they would mess it up and then it would ruin it. So I'm still open to doing it, but I want a team where can oversee it. I want the doctors there to be on board and open. One of the people who wanted to do the study, this is the head of the department, told me that she would kill herself rather than be vegan, and she's going to be the one in charge of the study. I was like, so how is this the person that's going to write up the study? Without me being involved, she's going to write the study and be in charge of it. And she thinks this is ridiculous and terrible. So that's what I was coming up against. And I didn't want it to be people who were not open-minded, who had more motivation to make it not work than to make it work, and who were unwilling to let the pioneer who came up with the program even be involved. It was weird. It was just really weird. And I'm like, you know what? None of this feels comfortable. And I trust my gut on this. So I said, you know what? I release this to the public. People can do it. If you want to work with me, but if not, the protocol is out there. Like right now, my classes are for free. I'm be doing public. I do free Q&As to the public. People show up from all over the world. Usually at least 10 countries will show up to ask questions, and I help them with their stuff for free. Do it all as a public service. So I continue to do that. And I will, I'm definitely open to doing a study, but it has to be done right. We owe it to the public to make sure that people can see the results in a way that really matters. Like right now I'm working with a cardiologist who he's a fan of mine, and he's studying heart disease. I can't give details yet because it's not out, but he asked me to write the protocol for his clinical trial. Now it's in heart disease, but pretty cool. We'll get to see what happens with that. But, he follows my work, and he said, if you could put what you did in a pill, you would have won a Nobel Prize, but you don't get a prize for diets. It has to be a pill. But, doctors who understand the research and the results, they're amazed by it. They're excited by it. So, so he is someone who I'm happy to work with because he's really motivated to help the public. He's plant-based himself. He wants to see what's best for people and see the power of nutrition. So, I think there will be more clinical trials, but the hardest part is funding. And the majority of clinical trials you see out there are funded by pharmaceutical companies. They're the ones with the billions of dollars. There is no big kale to pay for clinical trial, right? So that is a big problem we have, is the funding. Also, even as medical students, we're taught, do not read nutrition journals, do not read alternative health journals, read the New England Journal of Medicine. Just the front cover is all you need to get the facts. Never look at case studies. They don't matter. You need to only look at clinical trials. So it's like we're groomed to ignore any evidence besides the mainstream clinical trials that are funded by pharmaceutical companies. That's basically what doctors are taught. And so, like I said, it's an uphill battle, but it's one that's important to keep fighting.
But to be fair, the reason why keto and paleo diets also gain attraction is because of case studies, right? So maybe it is a good idea that people, maybe medical students, don't dig too much into the alternative medicine. I don't know.
I don't don't think that that's the case, because again, you have to look at what was done, how long was it done, and what's the vast amount of research. So for example, I just did a session on, it was a presentation at a conference on 4 people with combination of lupus and Sjogren's. So those are both autoimmune diseases. Sjogren's attacks, not only can you get arthritis, but also it attacks all the different areas that make fluid for yourself. So they get dry eyes and they get dry mouth. They can have dry vaginal secretions, dry skin. So they just, all their glands start to dry up. So it's a very painful and uncomfortable condition. So it was 4 women who all had both illnesses, who did rapid recovery with me. And it was 4 years later. And all 4 of them continue to have no symptoms, normal lives, no medications, right? That's what we want to look at. Is a lot of things can create a short-term change. Listen, if eating only meat is better than what you're eating now, you will have some improvement, right? If you're used to eating meat plus chips plus milk, and then you go to just meat, well, you just got rid of 2 out of the 3 things that are killing you. So you can have a lot of things that create a short improvement, but when you look long time, well, if I just keep eating meat, I'm going to actually increase my risk of cancer, of heart disease, of kidney failure. Maybe I should start adding more nutrition, of COVID, right? So again, short-term changes are different than long-term. I think we do need to consider case studies, but we have to look at them closely. What's going on here? What are the different factors that might be involved? But it is a difficult system to change the medical world, you know, the way we do things. And it's very complicated, and it's not based off of what's best for human health the way it should be.
The primary reason for this research being stopped, is it because of funding, and or because this type of research has to be performed particularly in the universities? I
think one of the major things that stops the big clinical trials is funding. Because like I said, I mean, most clinical trials are done by drug companies, and they have the money and they're trying to prove their drug works. But when you look at just, you know, I'm a doctor I have a private practice. I can't fund a clinical trial.
But if you have a very rich friend who says like, hey, I actually willing to do it, then trial is possible, right? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, that's actually how it got started with the ones that I was talking about. Is there is a wonderful man who, he is rich from Wall Street back in the day, and he actually had a massive heart attack. He was in the hospital, and while he was in the hospital from the heart attack, he sees an interview being done with Bill Clinton, talking about how he reversed his heart disease on a plant-based diet. And he went, Bill Clinton reversed his heart disease? So he sent his wife to go get the book he was talking about. It was Dr. Estes' book. And he read it in the hospital, and he changed his diet, and he reversed his heart disease. And he got back to skiing and feeling great and doing well. And he went, are you kidding me? You know, they were going to cut my chest open, and there's a diet that helps. So he decided to try to use some of his money. He started a foundation and used some of his money to fund this kind of research. And he funded the trial at NYU on heart disease.
Gotcha.
And so he wanted to help fund autoimmune disease stuff. And so that is how we even, you know, because those big universities won't do the trials without funding. So we were really excited that they were interested. We had funding, but then there was all these things that was happening. And he felt the same way. Like even the people who were going to fund the, one of the people who was going to fund the trial, they were showing what their expenses would be. They wanted him to buy them all new refrigerators, new computers, to pay for their flights when they go to conferences. He goes, what do you think I am? I'm not Pfizer. I can't afford this. Like, come on, right? We just need to pay for some lab tests, right? So it just felt really like we were getting hosed, and like they just didn't have the purest intentions. It just didn't feel right. And we both felt the same way. And so we pulled back on that and said, okay, you know, we'll wait for the right opportunity. I'm really excited about doing it for the right opportunity. I've been trying to reach out to get nephrologists on board, because I'm really good at reversing kidney failure. But most nephrologists don't have any interest in diet. Even the people I've helped save get off the transplant list, their nephrologists have said, I don't know what happened, do whatever you're doing, but didn't ask them what they're doing. No. So at a nephrologist, I always say that. A nephrologist recently just emailed me and said, hey, I'd be interested. Maybe we can do like a case series or something. I would love to do that. Give me your patients. I'll put them on diets. You evaluate them. And we can do a bigger case study. But again, it'll be a case series. It's not going to be a giant clinical trial.
Is a downside to this diet, like, I'm just wondering if I have this condition, for example, right?
Mhm.
What's a downside for me to try this diet alongside with the medicine that I'm being prescribed by my MD?
There's no downside in terms of your health, really. I mean, when you are doing something like hyper-nourishment, you're optimizing the nutrients that go to your cells. So you're going to optimize their ability to repair themselves. You'll optimize your immune system. There is no downside. In fact, for those of us who've been doing it a long time, I still hyper-nourish. And over time, it's actually continues to not just improve cellular function, keep you having a fast metabolism, but also reverses aging, and not only aging of your internal organs, but external organs like your skin. Your hair starts to grow like a weed, so it's, there's no downside. I think people should always hyper-nourish, right? We have so much that affects our inflammation levels, not just our diets, but our lifestyles, the amount of stress we're under, poor sleep, barely moving around much. We're sitting in our chairs all day in the office. So we have all these different factors that create inflammation in the body and inflammatory diets. So I think one of the best things we can do for optimal health now and in the future is hyper-nourishment. You have that green smoothie, your blender every day and keep up health. There are some people who struggle with adding it to their diets originally or initially because of the damage that's been created to their gut long-term by their other diet. So if you have eaten a diet of inflammatory foods and meat and dairy and all these things, the gut bacteria that you have prefer your diet. You have bacteria that survived because they prefer your current diet. So if you suddenly change over to eating tons of raw vegetables instead of burgers and fries, you might actually find you have gut distress. You're bloated, you're gassy. And so sometimes people go, oh, that's not for me. It made me gassy. Gassy is not a disease that you got to worry about, right? But the fact that your gut doesn't know how to process the nutrients it needs is a problem. So sometimes we need to, take our time with some things. They have to eliminate the inflammatory foods. They have to work their way up to higher doses of those vegetables. But it's so that's one thing. Some people, they have had so little fiber in their life. And fiber is essential. They've shown fiber is not just important for bowel movements, but they've even found that in mice, fiber alone can cure them of mice lupus, right? Fiber is important. So fiber is essential to our health, our heart health, our gut health, even our immune system. And many people never eat any at all. A piece of lettuce on your burger is not doing it. So they are so weak. Your intestines actually have muscles that help push things along. But if you've just let meat putrefy in your gut and you haven't had any fiber to keep it strong, the gut can get so weak that when you add fiber, you get bloated and constipated, when really fiber should make you go. Right? But some people, it makes them constipated instead. And so I have to work on increasing the strength of their bowel by moving more slowly. But still, the goal is the same. You should be able to eat these foods, these raw vegetables and all these things because your body needs it. But you got to work out more to get yourself to the level that you can do it. Most people find you add something like green smoothies, you have glorious bowel movements. They're green, they're regular, your energy goes up. Your health gets better, cholesterol comes down, blood sugar gets better. I mean, it's really amazing how quickly those things get better. But you might have to be a bit bloated and gassy for a couple of months while your gut kind of gets used to it. So I find the downside is mostly just the adjustment in the gut for most people. There are some people I have to adjust it for too, who have medical reasons why they can't handle nourishment. So like with kidney failure, once your kidneys are no longer functional, or barely functional, you can't metabolize nutrients in the same way, like potassium, sodium, or water intake. So I have to adjust the program to the maximum nutrition they can handle, which would be lower than regular hypernourishment, but as much as they can handle, not because there's something wrong with the food, but because their organs aren't properly functioning. So I do have to make adjustments. I recommend people do work with me when they have organ failure, because you got to get it right. And we got to make sure that you can handle what you get. But for most people, it's only going to be benefit.
Some people believe, and it's almost like considered to be truth, that plant-based means that you have to consume a lot of carbs, and carbs considered to be bad for people. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, there's, I call it nutrition mythology. There's a lot of nutrition mythology out there, like that protein is something that you have to get from any certain area. No, protein's ubiquitous, it's in everything. That there's a lot of nutrition mythology that's been built up over time. A lot of it because of industry and advertising, or some scientists got it wrong and people pounced on it and blew it up. But a plant-based diet is primarily carbohydrate. right? But vegetables are carbohydrates. It doesn't have to be a processed carbohydrate like bread. It doesn't even have to be grains. I mean, vegetables are carbohydrates, fruits are carbohydrates, and that's what your body needs. All right. We are glucose is what drives the energy in our cells, right? So there's a difference. I think when people are talking about carbs and eating too many carbs, they're really talking about bread and pasta and things like that, which you can eat as part of a plant-based diet. They're not going to increase health, but if you're otherwise healthy, you can have them, right? But it's not like one of those things where, mostly when they're saying they're low carb, they're saying, I don't eat cake, I don't eat bread, but you should be eating tons and tons of vegetables. And those are carbohydrates, but they're not going to make you fat.
Yeah. One other big thing is B12 vitamin that considered to be primarily in animal products, I believe in meat. And
it's not an animal product, actually. So B12 is a mineral that is found it's created by bacteria that live in your gut or live in the gut of animals, right? So it's bacteria that live in poop, all right? So poop produce B12, and B12 is important to the functioning of our body. When people eat animal products, they eat a higher amount of poop. All right. FDA has shown that every piece of meat people eat, every piece is contaminated by feces, right? When they're slaughtering an animal and they're cutting it apart, there's going to be fecal splatter that gets around. So every piece of meat people eat has fecal bacteria on it. And so if you're eating that, you're getting a decent amount of B12 from the feces. Now, naturally, you would get a little bit of poop in your diet eating plants if you were eating them in nature. Like an animal would come along and they eat some of the plant and then they fertilize it, right, with their poop, and then they walk away. And then what do? We grab some berries, we dust it off, and we eat it, and we get a little B12, right? Nowadays,
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. Nowadays, everything's triple washed, right? When I buy my greens, it says triple washed.
Yes.
So there's no more poop. So most plant-based or vegan people, we have a very minimal to poop-free diet. And so if you have a poop-free diet, you don't have B12 anymore. So you can just supplement it. I mean, that's very easy. You can take a B12 supplement and replace it, but it's not because you're vegan and B12 is in meat. B12 is in poop.
Gotcha.
So there are people who are meat eaters who are B12 deficient as well. Maybe those are the people who actually do clean their meat. And so I don't know what they do, but it is, and also B12 deficiency can come from poor absorption, which can happen as people get older, but it's not a signal or a sign that somehow we need to eat meat.
Got it. So historically, people could have lived without meat because they would pick up plants that been pooped on. Okay, interesting.
And fertilized. Yes.
That explains how they were able to survive without meat. I mean, that's very helpful. And Doctor, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully a lot of people will see it and at least draw their conclusions. They can research it more and maybe it's the right thing for them. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for giving me this time to share. You never know who's going to be listening that needed to hear that one thing that's going to save their life. So I appreciate the opportunity to get to share to your audience.